Good afternoon. I'm Randy Parker, news director at WITF and your host for All Things Considered. We just heard Governor Josh Shapiro offer his second annual budget address live from the state capitol, and he focused quite a bit on education, basic education spending, particularly on efforts to fix extreme inequities between the poorest school districts and the wealthier school districts in the state. And he pitched his goals to make Pennsylvania an industry leader nationally. I'm joined today by Burwood Yost, Director for Opinion Research and the Director of the Floyd Institute for Public Policy at Franklin and Marshall College, and by Jeffrey P. Beck, Ph.D., and Director of the School of Humanities at Penn State Harrisburg. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Randy?
Hi.
Jeff, is it fair to say that resolving education funding was a prime target or prime focus of this speech?
It's a key part of the speech. It's an absolute necessity, at least according to the Commonwealth Court, which has said that the state system is not equal. And so addressing that inequity is a key part of this. He puts $1 billion toward it, and that's a major first step toward addressing it. It's something that will be tough to sort out, and that there are different methods of sorting it out. Another method that he addresses in the speech has to do with charter school funding, which may be a bit contentious, but it's definitely a key pillar of the speech.
We expect differences of opinion on many items in a speech like this. It seems like it's an unusual moment in time where your courts have told you must fix this problem. Will both parties be motivated to attack the basic education spending problem, and will they latch on to what the governor is offering here in this speech?
They are incentivized to fix the problem. They must address it legislatively. It will take compromise to do it. That compromise last year proved to be very difficult, and I expect it will be very difficult again. But they do have powerful incentives on both sides to address it.
Now, basic education funding is different than higher education funding, and higher ed is also a big platform here within this address. What do you see there? What lies ahead?
Yeah, the blueprint for higher education. It's a key part of this speech, and it's a key part of the governor's plan. And you can see it's not just a one-year plan or a two-year plan. It's actually a 5-year plan. And one key headline of the blueprint for higher education and of the speech is the attempt to have $1,000 per semester in the PASHE schools for students who are from median or lower incomes. That was a headline that was seen across the nation at Forbes and Chronicle of Higher Education and other outlets. It's a key part of this plan, but that won't happen in 1 year. It's a 5-year plan. Right now, we're 49th in higher education funding per student. The governor plans to get that up to 22nd in the nation within 5 years. It's an incremental approach, but it's a first pass at that.
Is this building upon something that we heard from the governor last year?
It is. Last year, he said that the state's funding for higher ed was broken. He put together this commission to study the problem, and from that came this blueprint from higher education.
Okay. Burwood, it seemed that the governor was looking to strike a positive tone throughout, a tone of we can do this together. Yeah. He loves the phrase, let's get stuff done. Did that come through for you today in this speech?
Yeah, I think it's always good, besides the details, to think about sort of the message that the governor's trying to send. I think he was talking about investing in Pennsylvania. He was talking about building on the successes that he had in his first year. A lot of lines were spilled, reminding the legislature and the citizens about the things they've already accomplished and where to go next. And
it's got to be fun for a second-year governor to be able to say, "Hey, look, I actually did something this time," as
absolutely.
Opposed to last year.
Right. We've got something we can build on together. That was a real theme of this speech to me as well. It's very on brand for the governor to talk about bipartisanship and the need to move ahead in a common sense, pragmatic way. There were strong populist themes including I think some of the language that might have been
Yes.
your grandmother might not have
Right.
approved of it.
Yeah.
Mine might not have either. But he talked in a way that was relatable, I think, for many people. Let's face it, he gives a great speech. I mean, he's a talented political operator. But it was a long speech, and there were so many priorities and so many potential investments. I really wonder what comes out of this as the priority. I mean, I think basic ed funding is probably going to be what we talk about the most and where the legislature spends most of its time. But there's lots of other things that he talked about, and it's hard to say what the main theme was besides investing.
He and his team were making considerable noise last week about their plan to make Pennsylvania the nation's industry leader.
Yeah.
It seemed to me that he was forecasting that he wanted that to stand above the rest. What did you hear there, and what would we see in front of us?
Well, look, he's competitive, and his language again, right?
He's competitive against Ohio. We saw
tired
that.
of-
Yeah, that's right.
he's
He's
tired of Ohio.
sick and
That's right.
friggin' tired of losing to Ohio.
That's
Yeah.
exactly right.
Yeah.
So I mean, I the investments that he's talking about making, he thinks are going to make us more competitive in terms of job growth. I mean, you look at our population growth, or comparatively, we've lost population in the last few years, and we're not growing it as fast as the rest of the country. We need to do something to reverse that if we're going to stay the power that we've been industrially over time. And so I think he'd like, and his talk at the end there, reminding some of the murals in the building.
Steel,
right,
the
about
god
our,
of the Vulcan god
Right.
of steel.
That's
and,
exactly right.
yeah.
Pennsylvania's always been the keystone, obviously, for this country in terms of what it does. And so I think he's trying to call that back. But he's talking about spending a significant amount of money. And I think while any of those individual programs that he's proposed in and of themselves might be things that people feel good about, I think Republicans are reluctant to start making investments that they know are going to be in the budget perpetually. I mean, our
He
budget
talked
has
about how
grown.
he's not calling for a tax increase with this budget.
No, but
right.
down payment was an important
Down payment,
word.
yeah.
He used the word down payment several times, and so there's the down payment on higher education. There's the down payment for basic education. There are a number of down payments, and so it will cause the other caucus some pause about how much these down payments are going to lead to larger payments later.
It really raises the question. I mean, Pennsylvania for years has had a structural deficit. As we phased out corporate income taxes, lowered those over time, we've never replaced that really in the budget, the hole that's created. And so we've always had this tension, particularly in recent years, is trying to be more competitive economically by lowering business taxes, being more attractive
Yeah.
to business, which you have to be, and filling those holes. And so we've got to figure out a way to do that. And he did say there were no new taxes, but he does propose the marijuana legalization, which is a tax
It
source.
would increase, there'd be
Right.
taxes.
It's a
and
revenue
fees.
source.
A revenue source. And he's also going to, he's proposed, I believe, taxing and regulating skill games, these games of chance in bars, restaurants,
Fire
social
halls,
clubs. Right. And that would be, I think, something like $180 million source of revenue. So there are a few new revenue sources in here,
Yeah.
but not a personal income tax.
And part of it comes, too, from using some of the surplus.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Early on, he talked about how the surplus is not something to brag about.
Right.
We shouldn't be saying, "Hey, look, I've tucked
Yeah.
away this money and I'm not spending it."
Yeah.
But that's not going to play well
Yes.
on the other side of the aisle, is it?
No, the negotiating position from the other side is we're not touching the surplus. We're not touching the rainy day fund. But the governor says quite clearly, we've got a $14 billion surplus. We'll have $11 billion surplus at the end of it. By my math, anyway, that's $3 billion from the surplus.
Yeah. Can I add one other thing?
Sure.
We often, I mean, we were here kind of joking about the length of the speech. There is a lot in here, and it took a long time to deliver. We often talk, though, about how much of our politics isn't all that, real. Like, people talk in broad platitudes. They don't have specific proposals about the things they're going to do. that wasn't this, right?
No.
He has been very clear about how he sees the state, where he wants it to go, and how he's going to get there. And so, like it or not, there is a plan here, and it's very clear what he wants to accomplish.
You both used the word ambitious at different times while we were watching that speech. You see this as an ambitious plan, an ambitious governor, Jeff?
The governor says quite rightly that he is competitive as hell. He's
He did,
competitive
yeah.
as hell. He doesn't want to lose to anybody. He doesn't want to lose to friggin' Ohio. And he does want to drive economic development, educational development, other kinds of development, agricultural development included, in the state. And that's quite clear in both the populist tone of the speech, but also in many of the proposals.
How realistic is it that such ambition can be achieved when we've got such a divided state and legislature?
Well, I mean, he proposed many things in his last budget, his first budget, and he accomplished many of the things he set out to do, whether it was funding defense attorneys, right, school breakfast programs, whether it was increase in basic education funding. I mean, these budgetary proposals usually, I mean, the governor has leverage, for instance, that a president doesn't have, right? We've got to have a balanced budget, but at the same time, the governor has the line item veto, and he can take things out of that budget if he doesn't like them. So that gives him a very strong negotiating position, unlike what a president would have.
One thing that struck me, perhaps the most emotional or vibrant that we saw from the governor, was when he was talking about women's health issues, and he was unambiguous about his support for women's right to choose. Pennsylvania is a state that's not currently at risk of seeing any changes in those laws. Why did he take that moment?
That's a good question. I think it does strengthen his bona fides with the Democratic Party, that he is there for the woman's right to choose, and that's very popular for his side of the aisle, not so popular on the other side.
Yeah. I noticed, too, we were looking for times that maybe he would go off script, and he doesn't go off script very often.
No.
A little word choice here and there, but every now and then he was looking out in the audience, and he noted, I'm seeing people from both sides of the aisle, applauding for that. He was paying close attention to what the opposition was how they were responding.
Sure, because he has to work with them. I mean, you don't get anything done. I mean, he's got his own caucus in the House that, in fact, tanked some of the things he supported in the last budget cycle, talking specifically about school vouchers, right? And he's got a Republican Senate he's got to deal with. And I think, his image as a moderate deal maker is something that I think is important to him and is important to his efforts, his ambitions going forward. So I think, talking about the things that they've done together across the aisle and the things they'll do together in the future, that's going to be good for his future ambitions, whether it's making the state a better place or whether he has ambitions towards higher office.
Yeah.
Burwood, Franklin, and Marshall recently released some polling data that showed strong support across the state for marijuana legalization and for abortion rights. So the governor is proposing legalization of adult use of marijuana. He talked about it from a business perspective. Do you see that as an item that is politically viable?
From a public opinion standpoint, but let's face it, there are lots of things that most Pennsylvanians support that we haven't seen happen. So a prime example is the minimum wage. We've been talking about a minimum wage in this state for a long time, since Governor Wolf was in office. That hasn't happened. Probably isn't going to happen this time around either. So, the public support is there, as it is there for many things. Whether there's the legislative support behind it, I'm not sure there is.
Yeah.
You can go down a list of items. Probably gun
Yeah.
control items would be pretty controversial and not likely to move very far. There's a long list of those things.
Well, Jeff, let's talk about gun violence. I think that
Sure.
you had mentioned that you were seeing soft response from the Republicans on that.
Yeah, that's
there's
true.
also the law enforcement, part of that package. Is there a way to bring these issues together? Because the governor was proposing a department of an office of gun violence, a statewide office of gun violence. Is one of the proposals in here, but we gauged fairly tepid support, from the full audience there.
Yeah, that's right. The office of gun violence prevention that he's recommending, even though it's a small item in the budget relatively, $1 million, which is small in this size of a budget. But that will be a flashpoint on the
So,
other side.
so why is that? Because nobody would be opposed to reducing gun violence. Why is it that that is not attractive to the Republicans?
Well, because offices that study gun violence tend to produce either data that will lead to legislation that will prohibit the use of firearms in certain places or put restrictions on firearms, and the Republican caucus is very opposed to that.
You know, I think there's another thing when we're talking about the governor's style, and I think this is what truly politicians who have some skill do, is that they sort of reframe the contours of the debate. And so I thought what was interesting in the violence debate is how he started talking about parks and environment, and if you change the environment in a community by improving public lands and things like that, you're going to solve some of the crime issues and some of the violence issues,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And he's doing that with, I think, economic development, where he's talking about the investments in higher education along the same lines. And so it's interesting to see how someone takes a set of issues and repackages them in a way that they think can perhaps build more support, both legislatively and from a public opinion standpoint.
Yeah, and there was also a point about increasing the recruitment of police officers and EMS and firefighters, more money for public safety generally, that was alongside the Office of Gun Prevention. And while one might not be very popular on the other side of the aisle, certainly the other will be.
one of the themes that you both detected in here was a return to the idea of let's cut red tape. You see that almost as a Shapiro hallmark. Jeff, is that something that you're saying?
That's right. The governor wants to get stuff done. And to get stuff done in a timely way, you need to cut red tape. And that will be popular on both sides of the aisle. And with many frustrated citizens.
I had said that I could definitely relate to a lot of people I know in York County who are contractors or small business people who complain incessantly about the amount of time that it takes for a process to go through.
Right.
And the governor found a little bit of bragging rights there about some changes that he made this last year, and he sees a way to bring sides together to move forward in an area like that.
He does. Actually, I think that's, he's got this Code PA initiative, which is, he talked about here, which has to do with improving the state's web access. So it makes it easier to apply for permits and easier to get, I guess, some kind of certifications, right? It's going to be easier to do contracting with the state. And
He accelerated the amount of time it takes to get paid from the state
exactly
for
right.
Department of General
Exactly right.
Services.
So look, when you think about a Democrat talking about reforming government in a way that makes it work better, right? This is, I think, again, an example of him trying to appeal to moderates and to people outside of his party to say, hey, I'm working for everybody to do things that will make this a better state.
And I think some of the economic development pieces, which include agriculture and the rural communities as well as urban and education communities, will appeal to the other side of the aisle, too.
I guess the other thing to just remember is this isn't the end of the process.
Right,
It's the
right,
start of the
yeah.
process. All right, well, it's really the midpoint of the process. The agencies have been putting together their budgetary wants for a few months. The governor and his team have put it together to say these are our priorities. Now the legislature takes that and they decide what they're going to do with that, and this is where all the horse trading begins.
It's grueling.
It is.
It was very grueling this last year.
It was.
And I expect it will be grueling again.
It really dragged out last year. Does anything occur to you as an omission? Did he shy away from something that maybe really stands out or that surprises you?
Vouchers.
Yeah.
There was no mention of vouchers,
That
which
was what stalled out the entire process last year,
Yep.
and it ended up not getting passed.
right. Now, the only thing that I could detect anywhere close to a mention to vouchers was that he said he had made some mistakes last year and he had learned from them. Now, what he learned, he did not say. What the nature of the mistake was, he didn't say, but it might have been a hint toward vouchers.
Interesting.
You know, obviously there wasn't much talk about raising revenue either. And budgeting is a whole lot easier when you're swimming in money, right? And so they've got this rainy day fund, $14 billion. Maybe they'll take some of that. So, I mean, in reality, the contours of the budget are such that all of these revenue sources, all this excess cash should make it easier to come to an agreement about the budget outlines than if we were saying, we want to do this and we need to increase tax A, tax B. Like, think about the Wolf administration and discussions about a shale tax, right? And how that bogged things down. We don't have that this time. This is really, how do we divide up all this money we've got?
Well, quick point of context. How typical is it to have a surplus? How big is this surplus compared to what we might normally see?
So it's big, and it's not that normal. It's a $14 billion surplus. We have a $45 billion general fund budget. So it's, I mean, that's a lot of excess revenue that they can work with. And it is not normal to have, I mean, sometimes we might have several $1 billion in a rainy day fund, but that often gets depleted at times of when there are economic downturns, and then you have to refill that. So there's a lot of money there to work with.
It's very positive, and at times when there are budget surpluses, it's more popular to propose new programs. And so the governor is definitely doing that. Also, it's a time that Republicans often ask to have budget cuts. And so I would consider that would be part of the discussion, too.
We had a viewer watching today on YouTube who wanted to see the governor speak to minimum wage and changes there. And there was a lot of energy in the room, it seemed. I don't know if it was from both sides of the aisle, but that seemed to be one of the more energetic parts of the proposal. What is it that the governor is seeking for minimum wage?
I think he's calling for $15 an hour.
Yeah.
To raise it to $15 an
Yep.
hour from $7.25, but that's been proposed for years since the Wolf administration, and it has gone nowhere legislatively. It is popular.
That's more than doubling
Yes,
the current minimum wage, which is very significant. And if it were done, it would be done incrementally.
yeah.
And we have somebody else who noted that child care workers are not being paid a livable wage. That was something that the governor talked about in detail. He had some examples of people in the room and about how that can directly affect you when you have somebody in your life. So he's looking for increases for spending for mental health care, for women's health care, for seniors, and he spent some time talking about the whole home repair program that was passed last year. A lot of these seem to me to be very Democratic, very liberal proposals. And do you see support, again, is the Senate going to get behind some or all of those measures?
Well, I think some of this stuff, particularly when we talk about health care, there's a real crisis in our rural health care system. And so if you can start to address some of those issues, I think there's a lot of people who represent in the legislature represent rural communities where they need that kind of help. So, this is a place where you could start to see some of those trade-offs. Look, let's increase access for these people so that they can get the care they need. We've had a lot of rural hospitals closed. But I think overall the theme was about investments and making Pennsylvania a more appealing place.
And down payments.
Right. Well, right. I guess that's how you make your investments, with a down payment. But think about, if he said, and it's true that neighboring states have raised the minimum wage.
Neighboring states pay more for higher education. Neighboring states do a lot of other things that we should be
They invest
thinking about.
more in their businesses. Right?
Neighboring
Yes.
states have legal marijuana.
Right. So let's make Pennsylvania a place through these investments and down payments where people want to come and thrive. Because I get back to that point we raised earlier, our population relative to the rest of the United States is shrinking. It's not growing at the same rate. And if you want to maintain your economic well-being, you're going to have to attract people. The largest sector, the fastest growing sector of our population is above 60. So, what are we going to do to address that? You've got to replace working age people. How do you get them here? You pay them a good wage, give them incentives to go to college here, help them train, be employed. I mean, that all makes there is a sense to the investments that he's proposing.
Yeah, the education investments are in part economic development and go hand in hand with the economic development.
Okay. Okay. Well, my name is Randy Parker. I'm the news director at WITF and your host for All Things Considered. Thank you so much for joining me today. We've been joined by Burwood Yost, director of the Center of Opinion Research and the director of the Floyd Institute for Public Policy at Franklin and Marshall College, and with Jeffrey P. Beck, PhD, and director of the School of Humanities at Penn State Harrisburg. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me for this today. We'll see what happens next with this proposal. As you said, we're in the middle of the process, and there's a long road ahead. Thank you very much for joining us today. Appreciate your time.